Welcome to the channel, Liturgy of Fear. Today's story follows a young enslaved boy who fled into the Old West and, against every imaginable odd, rose to become the most feared gunslinger in Texas. His name was buried. His past was erased. Yet his story endured. This is a brutal and unflinching journey through survival, violence, and transformation. Take a slow breath. Settle yourself. Listen closely before we begin. Subscribe to the channel and share in the comments which city and country you're watching from. Your engagement helps keep these stories alive instead of forgotten. Now, let's begin. In the summer of 1873, a man dressed entirely in black stepped into a saloon in Dusty Creek, Texas. He was broad-shouldered and tall. His skin was dark as midnight. In his eyes was something that made grown men glance away. Within 60 seconds of entering, he drew his revolver and fired a bullet straight through the skull of Thomas Birch. Before anyone could react, the stranger disappeared into the blazing afternoon sun. That single gunshot echoed across Texas for the next 2 years. It was the opening shot in a campaign of vengeance that would leave 18 men dead. It was the declaration that a ghost had returned to collect debts white men believed had long been forgotten. The shooter's name was Zachariah Creed. Born into slavery, escaped at 13, trained by a legendary Mexican gunfighter, and now hunting down every man who had ever made him bleed. Newspapers labeled him a monster. Wanted posters called him dangerous. The enslaved people who still remembered him used another word. They called him vengeance. To understand how Zachariah Creed became the most feared man in Texas, we must return to the beginning, not to his birth, but to his mother's death. That is where his story truly begins. That was the moment the boy named Zachariah died, and something else took his place. The year was 1858. The location was a cotton plantation called Whitmore Estate, about 40 miles west of Houston, Texas. The owner was Colonel Henry Whitmore. He was not truly a colonel. He had never served in any military, but in the pre-Civil War South, wealthy plantation owners often adopted military titles to inflate their importance. Colonel Whitmore owned 3,000 acres of land and 112 enslaved human beings. In the region, he was praised as one of the most successful planters. His cotton sold for premium prices in New Orleans. Newspapers mentioned him as a shining example of Southern prosperity. What they never printed was how that prosperity was built. They did not mention the whippings. They did not mention the brandings. They did not mention families torn apart and sold like livestock. They did not mention the bodies buried in unmarked graves behind the slave quarters. Colonel Henry Whitmore was a monster, but in 1858 Texas, men like him were called gentlemen. Zachariah was born on the Whitmore plantation in 1847. His mother's name was Abigail. She worked inside the main house as a domestic servant, cooking, scrubbing floors, and obeying whatever commands the white family gave. Among the enslaved, Abigail was known for two things: her kindness and her voice. As she worked, she sang hymns, old spirituals passed down from her grandmother, songs about Moses, about freedom, about a promised land waiting beyond the river. Even those who did not understand every word said her voice could bring tears to your eyes. Zachariah grew up listening to that voice. It was the only beautiful sound in a world filled with ugliness. In secret, inside the darkness of the slave cabin, they shared with 6 other families. Abigail gave her son his name, Zachariah. It came from the Bible. It meant God remembers. Every night before sleep, she whispered it to him. "Your name means God remembers," she would say. He remembers every hurt, every tear, every wrong done to his children. One day he will make it right. No matter what they do to you, remember this. God remembers. When Zachariah was 3 years old, his father was sold to a plantation in Louisiana. He had no memory of the man, only the stories his mother told. His father had been strong, a field hand capable of picking 300 pounds of cotton in a single day. He was sold because Colonel Whitmore needed money to purchase more land. That was how it worked. Human beings were converted into acreage. Fathers became fields. Zachariah never saw him again. He never learned whether the man lived or died. That was slavery. Everything you loved could vanish overnight, and no one would even tell you where it went. By the age of 5, Zachariah was already working. Not yet in the fields. He was too small. But plantations always had work for children. He carried water to field hands. He collected eggs from coops. He swept the paths around the main house. He ran errands for the White family, the Whitmore children. 2 boys and a girl around his age. Sometimes threw rocks at him for sport. If he cried, he was whipped. If he ran, he was whipped harder. Very quickly, he learned not to cry. He trained his face into a mask that revealed nothing. It was his first lesson in survival. The head overseer on the plantation was a man named Thomas Birch. He was not wealthy. He came from poor white stock, what plantation owners privately called white trash. But Birch had discovered his place in the world. He enjoyed hurting people. Colonel Whitmore paid him well to maintain discipline among the enslaved, and Birch earned every dollar. His whip was braided leather tipped with small metal weights. When it struck flesh, it did not merely bruise. It tore. He used that whip almost daily. He claimed it was necessary for order. But anyone watching could see the truth. He liked it. He smiled when he swung. He laughed when they screamed. Zachariah was 7 the day his mother died. It was a Tuesday in August. The heat was merciless. Over 100 degrees. The kind that makes the air shimmer like water. Abigail was carrying a heavy ceramic jug of milk from the kitchen to the dining room. Her hands were slick with sweat. The jug slipped. It shattered across the polished hardwood floor, milk spreading everywhere. Mrs. Whitmore screamed, not because she was hurt. The jug had not come near her. She screamed because a slave had broken something of hers, because a black woman had made a mess in her dining room, because she was irritated and needed someone to punish. She called for Thomas Birch. What followed burned into Zachariah's mind forever. He was sweeping outside when he heard his mother scream. Slaves were forbidden to run near the main house. But he ran anyway. He rounded the corner and saw them in the yard behind the kitchen. Abigail was tied to a wooden post. Her dress had been torn from her back. Birch stood behind her with his whip. Mrs. Whitmore watched from beneath a pecan tree, fanning herself, a faint smile on her lips. Colonel Whitmore stood beside her, arms folded, looking bored. For them, this was routine. Entertainment. The whip cracked. The sound was somewhere between a sharp crack and a wet slap. Blood bloomed across Abigail's back. Birch struck again, and again, and again. Zachariah tried to rush forward. An overseer grabbed him and forced him to watch. "Watch, boy," the man said. "Watch what happens when you forget your place." He watched. He counted every stroke. 37. Her screams turned to moans. The moans turned to silence. Her body went limp. Birch finally stopped, breathing heavily. Colonel Whitmore nodded with approval and walked back toward the house with his wife, as though nothing important had occurred. They left Abigail tied to the post. She was still breathing, barely. The other enslaved were forbidden to help her until nightfall. By then, it was too late. She had lost too much blood. Infection had already begun in the brutal August heat. Fever came during the night. By dawn, she was dead. Zachariah was not permitted to attend her burial. He was not allowed to say goodbye. That same morning, he was sent to the fields. 7. Colonel Whitmore decided, was old enough to pick cotton. There was no room for grief. Only work. But something inside Zachariah shifted. Something broke. Or perhaps something was born. He did not cry. He did not scream. That night, lying in the place where his mother used to sleep, he made a promise. Not to God, not to heaven, but to himself. One day he would find Thomas Birch. One day he would find Colonel Whitmore. One day he would find every man who stood watching as his mother died. And he would make them pay. Every single one.